All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Supervisor Cohen. Okay. How's everyone doing? Thank you very much. Okay, let's look alive, folks. We've got an exciting agenda before us today. We're talking about land use and transportation. All right. Here we go. Thank you very much. All right, so this meeting is going to come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Transportation and Land Use Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee, and that is Scott Weiner. He's the vice chair. And to my left is Supervisor Aaron Peskin, and our clerk over here is Miss Andrea Osbury. I want to take a moment and thank Jesse Larson and Mark Bunch, who are televising this committee meeting for us via SFGov TV. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all cell phones and electronic devices, completed speaker cards, and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today may appear on the May 3rd, 2016 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you so much. Could you please call item number 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to modify the measurement of rooftop apprentices and infill spaces for non-complying structures in Z3 zoning districts.
All right, colleagues, we've heard and continued this item a number of times over the last year. I received a request from the sponsor to table this item. Before we do that, let's go ahead and take public comment. Public comment? Item 1. Seeing none? Okay, public comment is closed. Thank you so much. All right, I'd like to make a motion to table this.
So moved.
All right. Without objection, motion passes. Thank you. Madam Clerk, are you with me? All right. Let's call item number 2.
Item number 2 is an ordinance designating the 90 to 92 2nd Street as a landmark under Planning Code Article 10. Okay.
Supervisor Kim is, I'm going to imagine, en route to speak to item number 2. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and pivot to the Planning Department, who will make a short presentation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Shannon Ferguson, Planning Department staff. I'm here today to present the proposed landmark designation of the Burdett Building, located at 9092 2nd Street on the northwest corner of 2nd and Mission Streets in the South of Market neighborhood. The Historic Preservation Commission added the Burdett Building to the Landmark Designation Work Program on May 12, 2012. On July 1st, 2015, the HPC initiated designation, and on November 4th, 2015, unanimously voted to recommend landmark designation. The Burdett Building was constructed in 1903-1904. Its first tenants were a saloon on the ground floor. It's this little small building over here, and offices of a fabric importer on the second floor. The Burdett Building is eligible for local designation due to its direct association with the 1906 earthquake and fire. The disaster is the most significant event in San Francisco history. This photo shows the building surrounding the Burdett Building engulfed in flames. The Burdett Building is a unique survivor of the 1906 fires. It was located in the heart of the burn district, and it was the only building to survive without anyone fighting to save it. The building was also the only small-scale commercial building in downtown San Francisco to survive the fire. Thus, it is highly significant as an example of commercial construction in the downtown area prior to 1906. It is also architecturally significant as the work of master architects Bliss and Faville, and who was one of the most respected and prolific architectural firms in the early 20th century in San Francisco. Though the storefronts have been altered over time, the building retains more than sufficient integrity to convey its association with the 1906 earthquake and fire. There's no known public or neighborhood opposition to designation. A letter dated October 19, 2015 from Gloria Yee, a trustee for the property owners, notes that they are not in favor of landmark designation. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I don't think we have any questions. I would like to bring up Ms. April Veneracion from Supervisor Kim's office. She'd like to make a couple of remarks.
Good afternoon, supervisors and Land Use Committee members. I just wanted to speak on behalf of the Supervisor Kim's office and thank the Planning Department, Shannon Ferguson, and HPC for bringing this to our attention. We certainly support this landmarking of the lone survivor of the 1906 earthquake in the 2nd Street Historic Preservation District. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you. I just wanted to say to the staff at the Planning Department that the landmark designation case report was really a fascinating read, and obviously a lot of time went into it, so I just wanted to thank you and the Historic Preservation Commission for bringing it forward, and thank Supervisor Kim, and would like to be listed as a co-sponsor.
All right. Madam Clerk will note that. Let's go ahead and open up to public comment. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak on item number 2? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. Thank you so much. All right. Let's see. Is there a motion for this item, my friends? Moved. All right. Motion by Supervisor Peskin, and without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Now, item number 3, Madam Clerk.
Item number 3 is an ordinance exempting the humidor from 2 prohibitions in the tobacco sales permit ordinance.
All right. This is like deja vu all over again, Supervisor Peskin. What do you have for us today?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to you and Vice Chair Wiener for voting for this a week ago. As I announced at the full Board of Supervisors on Tuesday last, there are some additional exceptions that we failed to include in the original ordinance, and those are included herein, and I respectfully request your support to send it back to the full board as a committee report.
All right. Let's take public comment before we take up that action. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak on item number 3? Item number 3. Calvin Welch, are you coming to speak up on item 3? No? Okay. Seeing no public comment is closed. All right. Is there a motion to move out of committee, move this item as a committee report? Motion made by Supervisor Wiener. And without objection as a committee report?
Thank you.
You're welcome. It passes unanimously. All right. Madam Clerk, could you call item 4? Thank you.
Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning and administrative codes to increase inclusionary affordable housing fee, preparation of economic feasibility report, establish an inclusionary housing technical advisory committee.
Okay. Supervisor Kim is the lead author of this item, and it doesn't look like she or her office have any remarks. Is there anyone presenting?
Madam Chair,
all right, Supervisor Peskin.
I don't know if Deputy City Attorney Kate Stacy is here, but we have a number of mostly technical amendments that are sitting before you, and a copy of which I have just located. And the City Attorney can speak to them. There's also one additional one through the chair to Deputy City Attorney Givner. Is Ms. Stacy joining us?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, yes, I believe she's on her way.
Okay.
Moved faster than expected.
That's how we get things done. Yeah.
So there was one little typo that I noticed in rereading this over the weekend. It is in the findings at page 5. Where did it go? 6.7.015 needs to be changed to a comma. It's 6. There she is. I was stalling for time, Ms. Stacy, so I just made that little typo amendment suggestion, subject to public comment. And then there are a number of additional changes at page 22, line 13, section 415.2. Insert the word income before parameters, consistent with the income parameters of the programs. Page 24, line 19, section 415.3. After zoning districts, insert as they existed on January 12th, 2016. On page 26, line 17, same section, same words after zoning districts. On page, so that reads, within such zoning districts as they exist on January 12th of 2016. On page 27, lines 3 to 5, same section, section 415.3, add the sentence, notwithstanding the foregoing, a development project shall not pay a fee or provide off-site units in a total amount greater than the equivalent of 33% of the number of units constructed on site. On that same page, lines 12 through 13, after program, add in conformance with the income limits for the small sites program. On page 28, lines 3 to 4, add the sentence that says, such deadline may be extended in the event of any litigation seeking to invalidate the city's approval of such project for the duration of the litigation. A litigation force majeure, if you will. Page 28, lines 3 to 4, insert the word shall after deadline, so it reads, such deadline shall be extended. Page 28, lines 15 to 17, add the sentence, the inclusionary housing requirements for these projects shall be those requirements contained in the project's existing approvals. Now, if you skip to page 35, line 7, units supported by monies from the fund shall be designated as housing affordable to delete qualifying low income to moderate middle income and insert the word qualified households, delete the word defined, and insert set forth in section 415.2 for no less than 55 years. Has the same effect. Page 37, lines 11 and later line 14. If the principal project has resulted in demolition, conversion, or removal of affordable housing units, renting or selling to households at income levels and or for a rental rate or sales price below corresponding income thresholds for units affordable to, delete the word qualifying, insert the word low income households, and I'll keep reading, the commission or the department shall require that the project sponsor replace the number of affordable units removed with units of comparable number of bedrooms, or provide that, delete 12, insert 25% of all units constructed as part of the new project shall be affordable to low income or moderate / middle income households, whichever is greater. Page 37, line 25, which is in section 415.6 as well. All on-site units must be lowercase affordable to low-income households. Insert low-income households, make the capital A lowercase a. Page 46, lines 5 through 7. That's in section 415.10. Any adjustment, insert the sentence, any adjustment in income levels shall be adjusted commensurate with the percentage of units required so that the obligation for inclusionary housing is not reduced by any change in income levels. And finally, on page 26, line 1, jumping back, and we'll hear about this at public comment, this section would be revised to read, notwithstanding the provisions set forth in subsections B to A, B, and C of this section 415.3 for development projects proposing buildings over 120 feet in height as measured under the requirements set forth in the planning code, except for buildings up to 130 feet in height located both within a special use district and within a height and bulk district that allows a maximum building height of 130 feet. And then at the end of that sentence, add the sentence that says, any buildings up to 130 feet in height located both within a special use district and within a height and bulk district that allows a maximum building height of 130 feet shall comply with the provisions of subsection B to A, B, and C of this section 415.3 during the limited periods of time set forth herein. Those are the provisions that escalate depending on the year of one's environmental application, the percentage of off-site or in lieu housing.
Do you have language for those last two amendments pertaining to sections 26? You were reading
that language there.
Question.
Sure.
Just through the chair, a question to Supervisor Peskin. The last one that you read, the last amendment that you read, Supervisor Peskin, does that respond to the concerns that the Cathedral Hill Neighborhood Association raised?
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the introduction of many amendments. I have a couple that I will make after we take a vote and take public comment. All right? Is there anything else, Mr. Wiener? Okay. Well, actually, let me ask, it's a point of order. Should I go ahead and make my amendments now? Does it matter? All right, I'll read them in, and then we'll just take public comment, and then we'll do the vote. So, colleagues, I've got two amendments which I've circulated to you, and I'm making them at the request of Supervisor Farrell. These two changes remove two amendments the committee made last week. The first amendment is on page 24, and it removes lines 1 through 5 in section D. The following text will be removed. Any residential or predominantly residential mixed-use development project that has submitted a completed environmental evaluation application after January 2016, but on or before June 6, 2016, and that replaces a pre-existing non-conforming commercial use on a property in excess of 10 acres shall provide affordable units in the amount of 15.5% of the number of units constructed on site. The second change is on page 28 and removes the last word of line 8 through 11 in section C. The following text will be removed. Or for any housing development projects that on or before June 7, 2016 has entered into a final approved and executed agreement between the project sponsor and the city demonstrating that the housing units are not subject to Costa-Hawkins Rental Act. All right. You should have that language in front of you. Let's go to public comment at this time. If there's any members of the public that are here that'd like to speak on item 4, please do so. Just as a courtesy reminder, you have 2 minutes. All right, public comment is closed. Thank you very much. I love it when the public engages. That was a joke. Okay. Yes, Mr. Peskin.
So, Madam Chair, Supervisor Wiener, and to Supervisor Kim and her staff and my staff, Sunny Angulo, and particularly to Kate Stacy and the many members of the public and the development community, I want to thank you all. I think we've worked in a remarkably collaborative fashion to get to this point and look forward to hearing this matter at the full Board of Supervisors tomorrow.
Yep. I want to also acknowledge Supervisor Kim's aides as well as my legislative aides and Supervisor Wiener's aides. Everyone's aides have been truly remarkable in working this through. Supervisor Wiener, you have a few remarks?
Yes. I actually have questions for the Planning Department. So the legislation before us today, putting aside the grandfathered project, I know so much of the discussion has been about what should be grandfathered and under what circumstances. And that's obviously important anytime you're having a transition piece of legislation like this. But as I mentioned at the hearing last week, another concern has to do with the fact that we are setting a 25% inclusionary level. We've not yet done a feasibility study or a nexus study for that matter. And so my question is, do we know, again, putting aside the grandfathered projects, just for future projects that are going to be subject to 25%, if it's not changed, and we know that the board can change those numbers at any time, at 25%, it's a flat rate for any, or flat percentage for any project, I believe with 25 or more units. What will the impact be on the number of below market rate affordable units produced in San Francisco? Will this legislation lead to more affordable units produced than if the old rules had been in place, the same or a lower number?
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Anne-Marie Rogers, Planning Department staff. I don't think our office has the ability to project that into the future because we have not been seeing the pro formas of the projects that would be coming forward. But certainly the feasibility study will help you evaluate the right rate to make sure that you maximize production of BMR units.
Okay, but the feasibility study does not yet exist, correct?
That's correct.
And we're being asked to vote on setting this flat 25% inclusionary percentage for projects 25 or more without that feasibility study.
That's correct.
Okay. And so without that feasibility study, we don't know whether this legislation is going to lead to more affordable units, fewer affordable units, or no change.
That's correct. It could be
Okay.
one of many things that influences that.
Okay, and I believe we have a shared goal of maximizing the number of affordable units created in San Francisco. I think that's probably a pretty universally shared goal.
Certainly it is. I think everyone spoke to that last week.
Okay. How about housing production overall, including all forms of housing? Do we know, does the planning department know, whether this legislation is going to lead to more housing created in San Francisco, less housing, or no change?
Certainly, raising rates of the inclusionary requirement could result in a reduction of the market rate units. I think that would be fair to say. It gets a little bit more complicated with the BMR units because you're also producing more BMR units.
Right, but if there are projects that no longer pencil out, then that means no market rate units and also no below market rate units, because 25% of zero is zero, right?
That's correct. And projects that are on the margin, this could push them over into infeasibility where they would give up their project.
Or if a 40-unit project becomes a 24-unit project in order not to be subject to 25%, that's fewer units of housing.
That's another way you could get fewer units under the ordinance.
But right now, are there any projections? Do we have any projections indicating that whether under this legislation we will see more housing produced, less housing produced, or the same amount of housing produced as under the existing rules?
Our department has not done that work. I believe that the Comptroller's Office of Economic Analysis did a similar study in association with the Charter Amendment, and that did speak to the production of market rate and BMR units under the Charter Amendment.
Okay, but there's been no feasibility study yet.
That's right. There's no feasibility study.
So the Comptroller's report did not have a feasibility study attached to it?
He must not have. I'm not sure what mechanism the Comptroller used,
Okay.
but that was their study.
Is there a way to really know what impact this will or won't have on future housing production without knowing whether it makes certain kinds of projects feasible or infeasible?
I believe that is absolutely the best way to know.
Through a feasibility study?
That's correct.
Which we don't have.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right,
Oh,
Supervisor.
and actually, I'm sorry. I knew I had one other question. This is why I should always write them down instead of relying on my memory. Ms. Rogers, are you or the planning department aware of any project in San Francisco that has hit 25% affordable without a public subsidy and without some sort of upzoning?
We're not aware of anything.
Okay. And that's, okay, thank you. And that's a very telling answer. So colleagues, I supported Prop C, and I continue to support. I've endorsed it because it's important for us to take the inclusionary percentage out of the charter, and I think it is important to raise the inclusionary rate. And when we put Prop C on the ballot, I think a lot of us were in the mindset that yes, we should take it out of the charter, increase it, but do it in a way based on actual analysis in terms of what is going to maximize the number of affordable units built in San Francisco. And instead, what we have is a piece of legislation that simply sets the 25% as a blanket percentage for anything 25 units or more, without distinguishing between types of project, between whether it's a 30-unit project or an 800-unit project, without distinguishing perhaps among different parts of the city where economics may be different in terms of how much latitude we have in terms of how projects pencil out. None of that is taken into account. And that's the whole point of doing a feasibility study, because you get that kind of information and you can make a good judgment about whether you should have a one-size-fits-all, maybe that ends up being what the feasibility study shows, or whether you should have different ranges. as far as I can tell, there is no basis analytically for choosing 25% over some other percentage, whether it's 30% or 20% or 22% or 31%, whatever the case may be, because again, we don't have a feasibility study, and we won't, I think, for several more months. We all want to maximize the number of affordable units. It's not about the percentage, it's about the number of units we're producing. And of course, as I just mentioned, 0% of, or 25% of zero is still zero. So we could, in order to, show that we are so strong in affordable housing, we could just say it has to be 50% affordable. That 50% of the units. Why not say that, or 35%, or 32%, or 75%? We could say that, but if it renders projects infeasible, and so we have less housing produced, and that means we have fewer affordable units produced. And so it really concerns me what we're seeing here, and the fact that there does not appear to be any projects, or there do not appear to be any projects in San Francisco that have hit 25% without a public subsidy, without an upzoning, causes me serious concern that this legislation could effectively could be a de facto moratorium on housing. And that's the last thing that we need in San Francisco, to have a de facto moratorium on housing. We are finally starting to see rents leveling off in San Francisco because we have been producing more housing over the last few years. The other night, I was actually at a Passover Seder where one of the attendees was a small landlord who owns several buildings, who was talking about her concern that with the housing units in our long-term pipeline, 50 or 60,000 units of housing, it was going to cause landlords to start losing money because rents were going to come down. And I, of course, was very polite, but of course inside, as do we all, that's a good result. We want rents to come down. And they're not going to come down unless we actually add enough housing to meet the needs of a growing population. And putting in place legislation that could create a de facto housing moratorium or depress the production of housing, including reducing the number of affordable housing units produced, because 25% sounds like a good number. 25% sounds like we're doing something when in fact we may actually be reducing the amount of housing and the amount of affordable housing that is produced. That's just not something that I am comfortable with. And so I will not be supporting this legislation. I just don't think that this is the direction for affordable housing or housing overall in San Francisco. I think it could end up being quite counterproductive. I know that the feasibility study will come out, and then the board will have the option of taking, I think, a much more thoughtful approach, and I hope that happens. I don't there's no guarantee that it's going to happen. I know that Supervisor Peskin has been quite critical of the Board of Supervisors in 2011, reducing the inclusionary percentage from 15% to 12%. And I can foresee a lot of arguments 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, whenever this comes back, to say don't lower it below the 25%. We fought for 25%. Do not lower it below 25%. That is a very hard thing to do if the feasibility study ends up showing that 25% does not work and is going to undermine housing policy. It will still be very hard for elected officials to turn around and then lower it. We should be waiting to see what the feasibility study shows before we put in place inclusionary percentages. So I will not be supporting this legislation today.
Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, I just want to say that the legislation that is before us today, and I neglected to name April Veneracion by name, Supervisor Kim's aide, who has done extraordinary work. The legislation that is before us today, I think we should be very proud of. We have just managed to produce over 200 or approximately 200 additional units of affordable housing that were it not for this legislation would have never been produced. Supervisor Wiener is absolutely right. I did take exception to the 2012 charter amendment that was, without a feasibility study, lowered that number from 15% to 12% and put it in in our Constitution, in essence, where it could not be changed in 2013, 14, 15, or 16. We would have built thousands of units of affordable housing were it not for that legislation. But fundamentally, I think where Supervisor Wiener, respectfully, you and I part company is the fact that all 11 of us voted unanimously to put this charter amendment on the ballot, and I assume we all did so knowing that the language with the 25%, and let's talk about that 25%, it's 15 at what we call low-income housing, which is actually not that low, 55% of area median income or less, an additional layer of 10% that would be available to moderate and middle income individuals and families. Finally, all 11 of us voted for Supervisor Yee's resolution, and I want to thank Supervisor Yee for being the other co-sponsor of this legislation. And we have, through this process, adhered to that, and that is the process that said what I think we all hold self-evident, that we are trying to achieve the maximum feasible amount of affordable housing in San Francisco, and that we would endeavor to undertake a feasibility study being undertaken currently by our controller, and all 11 of us voted for that. And this is the implementing legislation, so while it is certainly your right to vote against it, it is inconsistent with the previous two votes, Supervisor, that you've taken on this matter. But that being what it is, I am delighted that we've gotten to this point. I also neglected to thank the executive branch and the mayor who helped get us to this point, and it was an exercise in trust, and I'm delighted that we have gotten this far. And with that, I am ready to take action on the amendments that are before us.
Oh, Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the comments, Supervisor Peskin. I actually don't think that this vote is inconsistent with previous votes. I was happy to support Proposition C and continue to support it. I think it is good to remove it from the charter. And I think it was actually really, I will give you credit, I think it was the really responsible thing to do, to say it's going to be a temporary thing and then the board will do the trailing legislation. I think that was a good process. My objection is that we don't have the analysis yet to support setting the actual ongoing inclusionary rate, and we should be doing the feasibility study first. I understand why you're heading in the direction you're heading, and all I'm saying is I have a different point of view. And when we're talking about something as critically important as housing and affordable housing in San Francisco, we need to make sure that we're basing it on these numbers on true feasibility. Because my concern is that, especially if I understand now that we're not going to get the feasibility study till sometime over the summer, is what I've heard. And so then we have legislative recess, and by the time everything gets done in terms of any possible revisions, even if we do make revisions to 25%, it might not be until next year for all we know. I just don't know what the timing is going to be. And then all of a sudden, we're going to see this gap in terms of projects that simply aren't moving forward because 25% is not feasible for them. And then we're going to see a slowdown in housing production. So those are my thoughts.
Thank
and
you.
if I may,
Supervisor Peskin.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, let me say, I think part of the reason that we treated the pipeline as lightly and judiciously as we treated it is because, and indeed, I think we could have gotten a higher percentage out of the pipeline. And the market would bear it. As a matter of fact, the fact that this room is not full of developers who are squealing about the additional 1.5% or 2.5% is because we were very light on the pipeline, fully understanding that with some 10,000 units in the pipeline and an annual absorption rate that does not even hit 2,500 units, that we've got 4 years worth of projects already in the pipeline. I remember very clearly sitting in these chambers some 15 years ago when my then colleague, Supervisor Mark Leno, absent a feasibility study, I may add, introduced a measure that ultimately created our first inclusionary law at 12%. And every developer in town said it was going to be impossible and the market would come to an end. And indeed, that did not happen. And of course, we had a robust economy in those years. Later on, that got raised to 15%. I think the fact that you are seeing rent stabilize is not a function of the fact that we've built so many units. It's a fact of shifting market conditions. I think that Ted Egan made it abundantly clear when he said we would have to build over 100,000 units, which may happen someday, but it ain't going to happen in a year or 2 years before you'd see any change in market rents absent a shift in market conditions.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your comments and your thoughts. Let's go ahead and see what public comment has to say. Is there any public comment?
We already did.
Do we take public comment on this? All right. So thank you. Let's deal with the amendments that we have open. I'll take a motion for yours.
I moved my amendments, which I previously read into the record and circulated, and would love to have a vote on.
I'm
Are
sorry.
you taking public?
I'm sorry. Look, I don't think we did take public comment on this item.
Public comment.
We didn't? Okay.
No, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we absolutely did.
Did we take public comment on this item?
Absolutely.
They're saying yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we absolutely did.
All right. Well, public
The
comment.
city attorney is nodding his head that we
All
give
right.
public comment and close it.
All right. I'm sorry. Public comment is closed at this time. Sorry. I run an efficient meeting. Got to get here on time. I'm happy to reopen it.
It seems like for whatever reason there were people who wanted to comment who maybe didn't realize. So I would move that we reopen public comment just to make sure people have an opportunity to speak.
So, Mr. Robert Tillman, I'm going to reopen public comment. Rena Melgar, if you want to comment, come on up, please. We've reopened it. 2 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the supervisors for taking care of the pipeline projects last week, and particularly Supervisor Peskin. Thank you. I'm here today to speak in support of the Planning Department comments on the density bonus language in the trailing legislation. And those comments were really two. Number one, that the language is legally problematical, and the second is that the right place to take care of those issues is by passing density bonus legislation for the city. I also sent last night a copy of the DCM Properties lawsuit against the city of Encinitas to John Raum and pointed out pages 33 to 39 of that lawsuit, which pretty much explains in detail why that language is problematical. And I'm sending it I sent it to him, and I presume I can provide a copy to the city attorney. Secondly, I'm a professional restructuring and person in the tech space, and I've done that for about the past 15 years, and I can tell you that in the tech space right now, there's a lot of distress. It's not as bad as 2000, it's not as bad as 2008, but we're getting there. It's good for my business, but I'm just giving you guys a heads up that this is not the top of the tech cycle anymore. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you for opening public comment again. My name is Mirna Melgar, and I'm here as a product of the Mission District in support of this legislation. I think there's still some nuances that I'd like to see worked out, particularly what happens after 2016, 2014 and 2015 options, the percentages for off-site and land dedication refer back to whether buildings are tier 1, 2, or 3, and then after 2016, it's a little bit murky to me what actually happens. So I'd like to see that cleaned up. But I would also encourage you to pay attention, please, to what's happening in the Mission, because we are bleeding families, and I think that we should be going towards more affordability, greater affordability there, not less. And so thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Thank you, Supervisors. Alex Landsberg with Carpenters Local 22. I'll keep this brief. Thank you, first of all, for reopening public comment and helping those of us who weren't fast enough to get down there say our piece. So, a few things. First of all, thank you for the amendments that you've proceeded to make, or at least that are considering today. I think this advances the effort, at least from the Campos E resolution, to really turn this into an equitable product and results in legislation that hopefully will not affect the pipeline that we have. We spoke last time we were here about the smaller projects that are inexplicably carved out of this legislation. The 10 to 24 unit projects. Spoke extensively about the wage theft that we've uncovered, the safety violations that we've uncovered, and the fact that these are often done by contractors who don't pay area standard wages to begin with, import their workforce from Stockton, and actually increase our requirement and our needs for affordable housing, because our affordable housing nexus studies do not take into account construction workers just through the equations themselves. So I realize that that with the legislation and with the charter amendment going to the ballot, that we really don't have an opportunity to deal with this right now, but as the inclusionary feasibility study comes forward, we are going to be coming back here. We're going to show you more cases of the violations that we're finding on these projects, and we hope that you'll be able to take them up and make sure that we don't allow low-road contractors to basically profit from both the misery of families in the mission as well as the misery of workers building their projects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Calvin Mulch, San Francisco Information Clearinghouse. I'd like to point out the current law is that 20% of the units need to be affordable to 100 average of 100% of AMI if they're built off sites. And Supervisor Wiener, there have been several projects built off site at that 20% period. Most of the at that 20% requirement, most of the high-rise office buildings have chosen to either pay the fee or build off-site, and the fee is also set at 20%. So I don't think we're talking about much of a stretch here, not nearly the stretch that has occurred in the language used. The inclusionary zoning program is not an affordable housing program. It is a below-market rate program. In the highest-priced housing market in the United States, you can produce a unit that is below market rate, but is still not affordable to even the workforce that builds it. And that is the situation that we face in San Francisco. There was a study done, a feasibility study, actually a nexus study, on the amount of affordable housing able to be afforded by people earning 100% of median or below, that is required to offset the housing impact of market rate housing production. And what that study indicated was that there needed, for about every 100 units of market rate housing, about 18 units of truly affordable housing needed to be built in order to offset the housing demands created by market rate housing. So it isn't quite totally the situation that is being described here, that we have market rate housing, that we have affordable housing, that we have below market rate housing, and they all have this iron relationship. Market rate housing, we're producing at a rate, ABAG tells us, more than...
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak? Because I'm going to close. All right. Public comment is closed at this time. All right. We've got some amendments that we need to take up, and then we will move on to item number 5. Is there a motion to accept the amendments made by Supervisor Peskin? All right. Motion to accept all of Supervisor Peskin's amendments passes unanimously. Is there a motion to accept the amendments that I've made? Thank you. Motion made by Supervisor Peskin, and without objection, my 2 amendments pass as well unanimously. Thank you very much. Now, the legislation at hand. Are there any last remarks, gentlemen? No? All right. Let's take a vote on the legislation as amended. You're right. I do need a motion.
So moved.
But let's see. Do we want this to come out as a committee report?
I would like to forward the legislation as twice amended to the full board with recommendation as a committee report.
Okay. All right. Let's do a roll call vote on that, please.
Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Weiner?
No.
Supervisor Weiner, no. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Supervisor Cohen, aye. You have 2 ayes and 1 Supervisor Weiner dissenting.
All right, thank you. The ayes have it. All right. Thank you to everyone that worked on the legislation. Could you call item number 5?
Item number 5 is a hearing on short-term residential rentals enforcement.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Weiner is the author of this item and will lead the discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for, well, actually, maybe I'll let folks filter out. Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for calendaring this hearing today. Colleagues, this is a quarterly oversight hearing that I've called for, and we held the first one in January. This is now our second hearing 3 months later, to hear from the Office of Short-Term Rentals and to actively monitor how the implementation of and the enforcement around our short-term rental law is going, to make sure that we have full public transparency and oversight in terms of the number of and trajectory of registrations of short-term rentals, because we want to make sure that more and more hosts are registering, as well as enforcement to make sure we're enforcing the law. I think it's important to back up and look at the big picture here. Before early 2015, it was only a little more than a year ago that San Francisco actually implemented regulation of short-term rentals. Before, I believe it was February 1st, 2015, there were no rules whatsoever other than a blanket ban, and it was pretty much the Wild West. The rules went into effect, I guess it's about 15 months ago now, and then a few months later, we, via legislation, created the Office of Short-Term Rental. And then in the budget that we adopted last summer, we increased the resources available to the Office of Short-Term Rental for enforcement. So we are really not that long into this process. It's been less than a year since we even created the Office of Short-Term Rental. We also should keep in mind that last year, within probably a month, less than a month of the effective date of then Supervisor Chu's short-term rental law, there were people declaring it a failure, even though there was really no way of knowing only a month after the effective date whether it was succeeding or failing. And shortly after that, some folks got together and began collecting signatures on a ballot measure that ultimately became Prop F for last November, that would have significantly changed our regulatory approach to short-term rentals and significantly constricted the ability of people to engage in short-term rentals. Not surprisingly, that significant uncertainty caused a somewhat of a flattening of hosts coming forward and registering. When Prop F lost, and we will see data on this, there was then a spike in registrations, and we've seen an upward trajectory ever since. We need to really support the Office of Short-Term Rental, make sure that there's good enforcement, that we're getting good information to the public, that we are encouraging people to register, and that we keep increasing compliance with this law. And so I hope that we will do that. I hope we can have some stability in the law so that we can allow that to happen. So Madam Chair, or I guess I'm the chair at this point, until the chair returns. I'd like to start off by calling up Kevin Guy from the Office of Short-Term Rental, who will give a presentation on enforcement and registration and general administration trends.
Thank you very much, members of the committee. Again, my name is Kevin Guy. I'm the director of the Office of Short-Term Rentals. So I am here, of course, to give a status update on the registration and enforcement efforts of the office, as well as some current data around the number of listing and hosts in San Francisco, as well as a brief item on the quarterly reporting that hosts are now in their second cycle of reporting. So I won't reiterate a lot of the great information that Supervisor Wiener has already provided here regarding the history of the program. But just to give you a sense of where we are in terms of our registration numbers. So as of April 2016, we've received over 1,700 applications, and this chart compares back to where we were in January when we last had this discussion at committee, when we had around 1,300 applications. Registered hosts, that means certificates that we've issued, are around a little over 1,200 versus 879 back in January. The applications that we are rejecting or deeming to be incomplete, we have seen an increase in those types of applications, and I'll go into that in a little more detail later. We're at around 425 versus 170 in January. The number of applications pending review has dropped significantly from 269 last January, or in January 2016, to 112. So this chart does show month by month since the launch of the application in the vertical bars at the bottom, registration applications received to date, and then the lighter blue line at the top indicating total number of applications received today with an estimate of April at the very end.
So that is between January and April of this year, a 3-month period, we saw, I guess that is about a 25% increase in, or almost a 30% increase in the number of registered hosts in that 3-month period?
That's right, and just to give you a data point that's not on this slide here, but I went back and looked at some of the numbers from around 6 months ago, and we've doubled the metrics of both applications received and hosts that we've fully registered and given certificates to. So just a really brief overview here on the registration process. So anybody watching from the public can be educated about what the process is and everyone can understand. First step is to first obtain a business registration from the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. The purpose of that is primarily to make sure that that person is in the system in terms of paying hotel taxes and other applicable taxes. The second part of the process, which is really separate and distinct and serves a different purpose, is to apply to the Office of Short-Term Rentals. And that's typically done through an intake appointment where someone submits a completed application, 2 proofs of residency, proof of insurance, just to make sure that someone is operationally eligible for the program by being a permanent resident of the unit that they want to register and that they're complying with other aspects of the requirements of the program. So we take in on those application materials, we review them against available public records to verify their accuracy, and then we issue either an approved certificate or a denial letter with an explanation of why the application was denied. So just wanted to touch upon some of the media outreach that we've conducted today to be in a mode of really trying to educate the public about the need to be registered and what the process is. So there were press releases and interviews to local print, TV, and radio media, including the Chronicle, KPIX, KQED Radio, and the Sound of Hope Radio, Chinese language radio, as well as presentations to resident groups and other groups who are interested, such as the Small Property Owners of SF Institute, Home Sharers of SF, and the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, in an effort to kind of bring our services and bring the program more to the people. Outside of our normal application appointment process, we held an all-day City Hall registration fair on March 22nd. We had a presence at the Earthquake Retrofit Fair at Bill Graham just last week on April 18th. And then we've also increased our accessibility of our office to try to remove barriers for people getting registered by opening up weekly walk-in hours. So for those people interested in registering but are a little phobic for whatever reason about scheduling a specific appointment time, if they just have general questions before they submit their application, they can do that each Wednesday from 1 to 4 p.m. We also have monthly evening hours to accommodate folks who can't come during standard business hours, first Monday evening of each month. And then we have a couple of upcoming events out in the community. First at Ortega Branch Library on May 5th, Potrero Branch Library on May 19th, and some additional events in June that we're working on scheduling. And those will all be evening events as well. So now I do want to transition into current listing and host data. A lot of this information is already embodied in the recently published BLA report about the number of listings and the number of independent hosts that are located in San Francisco. So as of the November 2015 data published by the BLA using web scrape analysis, Airbnb alone as a platform at that time had around 7,000 listings and around 5,400 unique hosts. So it's important to understand that certain hosts and ways that can be legal and not legal maybe have multiple listings on Airbnb. So 57% of those were for entire units, in which typically the guest has the run of the property while they're staying as a guest. Private room typically describes a situation where a host is renting out a bedroom or there's some sort of spare space, but they're actually present on the premises while they have a guest. And then another 5% are shared room listings. Airbnb self-reported some data in March that those number of listings have increased to around 9,500 and a little over 7,000 hosts. And in terms of numbers on other platforms that operate here, the other kind of major platforms, VRBO and HomeAway each have close to 1,800 listings, and Flipkey has close to 900 listings. I do want to note that it's very common practice with hosts to list their properties across multiple platforms, and as I mentioned, maybe list multiple rooms in their units. And again, that can be done in ways that are in accordance with the ordinance and are legal under the ordinance. But just to be clear that if you were to add up all of the numbers of listings that you see here, that doesn't necessarily correlate to the number of units, dwelling units in the city that are being offered for short-term rental. So digging deeper into the data allows us to understand better the types of hosts that have not yet become registered for the program. So there are categories of hosts that, first of all, are simply going to be ineligible to register for the program. These include individuals doing full-time vacation rentals or appear to be doing so, given the frequency of reviews and the frequency of kind of hosting activity that we can see seems to represent around 18% of hosts. Another 7% of hosts are actually listing multiple properties. And of course, one of the core regulatory tenets of the program is that if you want to host legally, you have to be a permanent resident. By definition, it's impossible to be a permanent resident of multiple properties. There are also smaller subsets of listings that are being offered for over 30 days, which are technically not subject to the ordinance. These are not considered short-term rentals, around 4% there. And then traditional hotels and timeshares, which actually utilize these platforms to advertise rooms, represent a small subset that we should mention. But all of these would be categories of individuals who are either not eligible or don't need to register for the program. Now, there's another interesting data point that we see, that is listings that have no reviews. So we understand that the majority of guests that stay in short-term rental properties do leave reviews. We also have a pretty good list of individual listings that have had no reviews, and I've even discounted kind of recent postings from 2015 and 16. So looking at 2014 backwards, around 13% of listings have no reviews whatsoever. So this would suggest that these are properties that are rented out either infrequently or not at all. They may be sort of dormant accounts that were posted at one time, and the users decided they didn't want to continue with this activity and sort of forgot about their listings, but they're still up on the hosting platform sites. There's another population of individuals that's a little harder to quantify. These are tenants that may now have a no subletting clause in their lease, as is very common, or individuals who are owners of condos or are in a situation with a homeowners association where there are other rules prohibiting short-term rental activity. So these are individuals that may actually qualify under the city's program to be legal short-term rental hosts because they meet the requirements for residency and insurance and all of the other requirements. But they're sort of afraid to come out of the shadows, as it were. We do, as a matter of practice, send a notice to the property owner of record when we receive a short-term rental application. So there may be plenty of individuals out there. We are a city of predominantly renters that are doing this activity, but are afraid to come in and get registered because they don't want their landlord or their homeowners association to become aware of it. And as I indicated before, we have had a recent increase in applications that do come in the door but have a higher rejection rate. We either get incomplete documentation or information submitted on the application contradicts information that we have from other publicly available sources as to their eligibility. In other words, we find out in other ways that they don't really appear to be eligible for the program. So what all of this points to is sort of a profile of the types of users that are the delta of people that are listing currently but are not registered. And some of the difficulties that I think we're finding in terms of getting certain populations in the door. In other words, there is a larger population of hosts out there listing on these platforms than we would be able to register even if we could wave a wand and make everyone that's currently listing get registered tomorrow or come in to apply to get registered. So one of the initiatives that we've been working on is coordinating with the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office to obtain publicly available information, start identifying individuals who may have sort of completed step one in the process, getting their business registration, but have not come to the Office of Short-Term Rentals to apply to prove their residency. So the next step naturally becomes, in the next discussion point, well, what to do with that delta, what to do with that population that has not come in and get registered despite our outreach and educational efforts. So we've been doing a lot of enforcement activity to date already. In recent months in particular, we've been really ramping up and cracking down in a proactive way on really focusing on the types of, some of those types of populations that I just described. Hosts with multiple units, people with full-time vacation rentals or what appear to be full-time rentals, people that there's a smaller population of people that are now in their second violations, that they previously abated their short-term rental activity but continued again and now are subject to additional enforcement with higher penalties per day of up to around $1,000. So we have also, I do want to significantly mention here that we've issued notices of violations to several platforms. The hosting platforms do have an obligation under 41A to provide information to their users on San Francisco specific requirements. The language in the legislation is fairly specific as to what they're supposed to inform their users of, and several of the hosting platforms have failed to do so. So we've issued notices of violation to those two several platforms. In terms of how we're doing our work and utilizing our resources best, we're utilizing web scrapes and other publicly available data to not only facilitate and shorten the timeline for our investigatory work, but also really prioritize our caseload. Again, trying to focus our proactive work on sort of egregious offenders, people that really appear to be taking units off of the long-term rental market, which is not to say, and I want to emphasize that we're not also looking at and investigating people who just aren't registered but don't fit into the egregious category. We still receive complaints about those types of users, and it's important that everyone who wants to do this legally get registered. So just in terms of data, we've opened up 423 enforcement cases since February 1st of 2015 when the program launched, issued notices of violations on 174 dwelling units. We've closed a total of 169 enforcement cases, and then we have another 61 cases with 95 dwelling units involved that are pending closure. These are generally sort of recently issued notices of violation, and assessed almost $700,000 in penalties to those people that have been listing without being registered. And then just briefly wanted to talk about host reporting. So there's another aspect of the program that once someone is registered, in order to maintain good standing with our office and be able to continue to legally host short-term rentals, they need to do quarterly reporting or reporting back to the date of their last registration. So we began our first cycle of this reporting on January 1st of this year. And that reporting cycle concluded about a month later. So this was to account for, again, anyone who registered at any time following the launch of the program. So we received a 62% response rate. The data that we received back from the host is that 52% of them conducted hosted rentals only. That means, again, rentals where they're in the unit while their guests are staying with them. 18% hosted exclusively unhosted rentals. 23% hosted some combination of hosted and unhosted rentals, and 6% reported having no stays during the reporting period. So we resumed our quarterly reporting again beginning on April 1st, so we're currently in a reporting period. We're already seeing a lot better response rates from our hosts. This would be the second time around, so hopefully people are just getting used to the need and to comply with this requirement and used to the process. We've been working with our fantastic team over the Department of Technology, too, to make improvements to the online reporting form that they created. The form was already a fantastic help to, I think, both our office and our users back in January. They've been making lots of small but meaningful improvements to the functionality and look of that form to make it easier to use. And more importantly, I think sending out periodic email reminders to hosts who have not yet reported to us. So they get a little ping every couple of weeks until the end of the reporting period, reminding them that they need to log on and give us this information. So there's plenty of other information I can go over, and I'm certainly happy to delve into anything further. Just wanted to close, though, with our contact info here. If anybody is interested in filing enforcement complaints, has general inquiries, they can contact us via email or via our general information number. And as I mentioned, we do have walk-in hours every week and monthly, the first Monday evening of every month. We're going to be hosting, again, events out in the community to try to bring the program and the registration process out to people and remove any barriers they might have in terms of coming down physically to our offices to get registered. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the thorough presentation. Supervisor Peskin has a few questions.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and thank you, Mr. Guy, for your work in this evolving field and evolving office. I had a few questions, and I apologize if you already mentioned them. How many staff do you guys have?
So we are a total staff of 6 people, including myself. We became really, truly fully staffed in February of this year. So I joined the office back in September of last year. So we've been ramping up our staffing. We're finally at a full staffing level.
And I noticed the last report that you made was January 11th to this committee. That was a year ago?
No.
I have what was included in our packet says at the bottom, Land Use Transportation Committee, January 11th of 2015.
I'm sorry if there was a typo somewhere on that. No, the last presentation to the Land Use Committee, the first of the quarterly sort of updates, as Supervisor Wiener mentioned, was in January of this year.
Okay, so
I apologize for that.
No problem. That makes perfect sense. I was just comparing the two, and one of the questions I had was, on that report, you actually differentiated between penalties assessed and penalties collected, and in this report you just show penalties assessed but not penalties collected.
Sure.
I was just wondering how that number has changed since the last report.
Sure, I'm happy to report on that. So we've collected around $160,000 of the total penalties assessed. There is, hold on just one moment.
So in other words, the penalties assessed have gone from the last report, you assessed $475,000 and collected $124,000, and now that's gone up to $695,000, and you've collected $160,000.
So, in terms of penalties collected to date, we're at a little over $160,000. $247,000 approximately is pending. I should note a lot of that penalty, around $193,000, is involved in one single case that's headed toward litigation. And then for some of our older cases and more significant penalty amounts that have not been collected, $387,000 have been referred to the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue for future collection.
And you indicated that in some cases you have issued notices of violation or notices of decision against the hosting platforms themselves. Have they complied with those?
So the first of those notices of violation for the platforms ran out on April 1st to HomeAway/VRBO. The second one is being issued to Flipkey today. So we just started communications with HomeAway/VRBO, and obviously not heard back from Flipkey yet, as that violation is going out today.
Understood. And then just relative to the numbers, the self-reported numbers from the largest market share hosting platform, Airbnb, which you have at 7,047. I was just kind of doing the math, excluding the other hosting platforms, that if we look at the total number of registrants, and so the way I did that was off of your, I was just doing that just now, off of your sheet that shows that 1,210 have registered and 425 have been rejected and 112 are pending review. So at that rate, I would assume that approximately a third of the 112 remaining, approximately 40, if you will, would, going forward, likely be registered. So that got me to a number of 1,250, which shows me a registration rate of about 17.7% in the first 15 months of this program, and a little bit less than 100 a month, which if we continue at that rate, assuming that the number of hosts did not go beyond 7,047, would take 5 years to reach full compliance. Any thoughts or comments on that?
So that is very true. I think we have had some good successes in terms of the registration numbers, but as I noted, there has also been an increase in the number of host listings going up. The registration, I think this is an important figure to look at here, or an important chart. The registration applications we received, it really fluctuates a lot month to month. We have noticed, unfortunately, a bit of a downturn over the last couple of months in our applications coming in after spiking in November, December, January. So I think it remains to be seen whether this continues to be a leveling off trend or a reduction in the applications trend. We would certainly like to see more. That's why we're getting out to the community more, hosting more kind of evening hours and walk-in hours, and trying to remove some of the barriers that people might be experiencing to get registered. But as I discussed in some detail, I think we may be experiencing something of a phenomenon too, of a substantial number of people who, either for sort of reasons of being categorically excludable from the program or reasons of kind of being hesitant to come out of the shadows and get registered, really no amount of necessarily education or outreach will reach those types of populations. So there are fewer registerable individuals out there than there are total numbers of hosts.
Or alternatively, know that they shouldn't come in because they don't meet the criteria.
Correct.
Right? There's no incentive for you to be in the shadows if you actually fall within the confines of the laws that exist today.
Right. So this is where the proactive enforcement work that we've been doing and are ramping up significantly comes into play. Obviously, if people feel there are no consequences for not coming in and getting registered, they're likely not going to do so. But education and outreach is important, but at some level, there may just be people that are eligible to register but are really reluctant to for a variety of reasons. So that's where the enhanced enforcement really becomes key, and we'll hopefully start shifting the numbers in terms of the registration applications that we're seeing here.
Are there additional tools that you need that you don't have, that you would like to have, that this board, if it could agree, could give you?
I mean, I think one of the things that we're setting up now is a process by which we'll get consistently updated web scrapes. Those have become a really invaluable tool for our enforcement staff. We're just learning how to work smarter and utilize all the available data that we have. So we've been utilizing web scrapes, and we want to establish a system of making sure that those are constantly refreshed, because this is a very sort of ephemeral industry. People tend to come in, come out. The numbers change over time. We saw a significant spike over the last few months in listings, possibly related to the Super Bowl or other factors, who knows, entirely what everybody's reasons are for being new registrants. But we do know that it's a bit of an ephemeral number in those and an ephemeral sort of population. So having updated web scrapes that we'll be implementing will allow us to prioritize our work in a continuing way, make sure that we can easily identify when we receive a complaint, listings that are in violation, show us kind of the nature of hosting activity, that we don't have full access to all information on their booking activity, but you can get a pretty good sense of how they're operating their unit. by looking at the web scrape data.
And relative to the enforcement numbers of the, can you tell us just by percentage, rough numbers, how many of those were complaint-driven versus how many of those were proactively pursued by your office?
So if you look at the entirety of our casework, around 15% or so to date have been either complaint-driven directly from the public or referred to us by other agencies. With our recent rounds of enforcement, we're shifting much more to like 40 to 50% of the violations that we're pursuing are proactive cases that we're building, and we're particularly focusing again on these sort of most egregious actors, those folks that have multiple listings out there for multiple units, units that appear to be full-time vacation rentals, kind of activity like that, which isn't to say, again, that not everybody wants to do this legally, doesn't need to worry about enforcement, they need to get registered. And we still want to be responsive to complaints because often those come in from individuals who have observed the activity, been affected by it directly. So we want to try to strike a balance between our proactive and complaint responsive enforcement, but really ramp up the proactive activity.
And out of those 423 cases that you've opened, could you characterize the types of violations in rough percentages?
I mean, quantitatively and qualitatively, there are all sorts of different types of violations. I think probably the most common type of violation that we see, that we've historically seen, are people who are just hosting without being registered. Many of them are actually permanent residents that are eligible for the program, and we certainly, as part of the enforcement process, we've managed to engage them, although in a way that they're probably not happy about initially, but it gives us an opportunity to open up a dialogue, kind of help them through the process, let them better understand the rules, and engage them to get them registered if they want to continue to do this legally.
And do you have like out of that 400 and a quarter caseload, do you have a rough percentage? Is that half of those? Is that a third of them, 20%? Any kind of rough guess?
I would, if I were to put a guess around it, I'd say probably 2/3 of those individuals are actually residents that are eligible to register. That's our historic caseload. I think as we get into more of the, again, amping up the proactive complaint work as we've been doing, we're going to see a much higher proportion of sort of finding people in violation who do not actually live at the unit. They're kind of one of the major policy concerns, obviously, of the program, taking long-term rental housing stock off the market.
That's actually an interesting number if you think about it, which is if, say, 2/3 of 425 were folks that either, whether it was complaint-driven or proactive on your part, you essentially made them register, that's almost a quarter of your total registrations were a result of you having to do enforcement. So, I mean, that drops that 1,250 number down significantly relative to folks who have registered voluntarily.
So just to be clear, too, on the numbers, 423 cases open in terms of our enforcement cases. That represents all cases opened since the program was launched. There are a number of cases where we do find, as we investigate, that the violation is actually on the wrong property. Somebody kind of had their information wrong. What looked like short-term rental activity was actually not. Or somebody's listing is already down, they've stopped the activity, things like that. So I just want to be clear that not all 423 cases necessarily mean a violation.
Understood. And then relative to Airbnb, who we read an article recently, a few weeks ago, that they were going to self-police, particularly in and around the most egregious thing that I think is occurring in this town, which is individuals who list multiple units, and that they were going to self-police those. How is the relationship between your office and Airbnb relative to their being cooperative with you? Because that obviously is, I think, the source of, at least for this supervisor, the largest source of my angst about units being held off the market that are being done obviously in contravention of the law, but with their cooperation thus far.
Sure. So as you may recall, we reached out to several of the platforms back in January. This was one of the items that we talked about as an operational change that we would like the platforms to see if they want to be better partners in terms of collaborating with our office in compliance with the law. I think it's that announcement and that category of user, that category of short-term rental listing is problematic, clearly. These are clearly units that are not eligible for the program. They're taking long-term housing rental stock off of the market. So I think in concept, the announcement Airbnb made is laudable. The idea of taking down the units is admirable. What we don't have at this point, unfortunately, is any sort of communication or auditing mechanism for us to fully understand as a city agency around this issue, why the amount of people that they're truly delisting for this reason, or sort of an explanation of the reason that certain listings were taken down.
And in January, you sought their cooperation relative to them furnishing that kind of information to you, but that has yet to be forthcoming, is what you are saying?
Right. We were not able to reach a place in our discussions with Airbnb about that sort of data sharing, as it were, around certain types of users. I think there was an acknowledgement that there are people using Airbnb and other platforms in a way that is not at all consistent with the city ordinance currently, and listings that Airbnb has stated publicly that they don't want that type of activity on their site. But where we did not reach any sort of conclusion was the amount of data, kind of data transfer and data sharing and auditing that would go on under some scenario like this between our office and Airbnb.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you think about the compliance rate at approximately 17.7% based on their own numbers, and that does not include individuals who don't share platforms. So presumably that it's closer to that 9,000 number, somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000. So the 17.7% registration rate in the first year and a quarter of the program was definitely lower than that 17.7%. Do you think that the remaining 80 or 85% are all not able to comply with the terms of the program, or what's your guess on that?
Well, as we talked about before, and you've acknowledged in your statements here, getting exact data around this can be a bit tricky. But if we kind of drill back into some of the conclusions that we can reach, if I can have the overhead here, about the profiles of people that are unregistered hosts. If you add up sort of those four categories of hosts ineligible to register, and compare those against the around 5,400 unique hosts that the BLA data reports from November and the 7,000 that Airbnb self-reported, you've got anywhere between 1,600 and around 2,200 people who appear to be just categorically ineligible for the program, not able to register. And then, as I mentioned, too, other populations who may or may not be eligible for the program, but may not be coming in to get registered for other reasons of being found out by a landlord, their listings are dormant, any number of circumstances.
And when we say some 2,000, 2,500 people, that could be way more than 2,500 units, right? Because one of those, is that units or is that actors?
So the numbers that I was talking about are host numbers. So some of those hosts, again, are, let's talk about the multiple listing situation. Someone may have say a very large unit, a 5-bedroom unit. They may actually create 6 different listings for that one unit. One where you can, as a guest, rent out the entire property, and another 5 for each of the separate bedrooms. So there is some duplication. It's not always easy to totally ferret out those numbers, and that's why there's always going to be a delta between number of unique hosts and number of listings. So that would be an example, if that person were registered, of somebody who could legally have 6, 7, theoretically 8 listings up on a registered unit, but there are certainly hosts out there who are listing multiple properties and are not registered and would never be eligible to get registered.
Understood. And then relative to legislation that was the subject of a newspaper article today that would be more stringent relative to the host's compliance, particularly around individuals with multiple units listed, would that be helpful to your program?
I've not been referred the legislation. I haven't had an opportunity to review it in detail. I mean, I think, again, kind of thinking back to our operational ask to the platforms back in January about things that they could be doing to make the legislation work more effectively. There there are a number of things, a number of steps that could be taken, certainly to increase the pace of registration through, carrots and sticks. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would hold off comment until I actually get a chance to review any legislation that's proposed. But that said, I think it's all a question of whether or not the supervisors feel that the current pace is adequate, and there's confidence that the pace will accelerate both on the registration and enforcement end in the future, or whether changes need to be made. That's a decision up to the board, really.
Thank you. I have no further comments or questions.
Madam Chair, at this point, I would like to open up public comment.
Public comment is open. Any member of the public that would like to comment on item 5, please do so. Just keep in mind you have 2 minutes. Please come on up. Line up.
Excuse me. My name is Mark Bruno. I'm a 32-year resident of North Beach, which is part of District 3. To clarify something that I felt was... Are you Mr. Guy? Yeah, Mr. Guy and I had several conversations by phone. He was very friendly to me when I complained with another member of the District 3 neighborhood about a particular place on Filbert Street. And this is an ongoing case that has not yet been closed, so I've been asked by people at the short-term rental office to not yet reveal the address. You can find it under my name and also the name of Howard Wong. But the point is, this is something that answers the question that was just posed by Supervisor Peskin, and I feel was not quite answered. And that question is, if you have 1,600 people who are not abiding by the law, does that represent more than 1,600 units? In our particular case on Filbert Street, it certainly does, because this is one of those cases where the owners, a couple, a husband and wife, have 6 units. Well, by nature of the law, they could only live in one of those units. In fact, they live in Atherton. You can go to the office down here with the deeds, the records and assessor's office, and you'll see they don't even live in the city of San Francisco. But even if they had lived in one of those 6 units, the law will tell you they can only sublet or short-term rent one of those units. So the very nature of 1,600 people, the example given by Mr. Guy is one type of extenuating circumstance with a single person renting 5 bedrooms or something. But what about the person who rents 6 units in a building where everybody was evicted? They were all renters who are living there as part of our neighborhood. That's grossly unfair, and that's what's going on in our neighborhoods. I ask you to consider seriously the Campos-Peskin legislation. I'm sorry about the time, but I did hear Supervisor Wiener answer on KCBS, which is why I'm here today, a question about, do we need more legislation or do we need more enforcement? One does not preclude the other. We've all worked in the city long enough to know we want an agency, this agency, which is doing the best it can, to be paid for the work. And how do you pay for it? Have meaningful fines. Have fines.
All right, thank you.
Their job or participate in the law. Let the fine pay for the...
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Next and last, it looks like. My name is Reed Uller, and I'm in Supervisor Wiener's district. And I am a host. I am registered. I am legal. I have business license. I pay the taxes, hotel taxes, property taxes, everything. I want to address Supervisor Peskin's concerns about the registration rate. There are those among us, other hosts and myself and my wife, who are conducting registration workshops in an attempt to accelerate the registration process. So we're working hard to attract those hosts who have not registered to these workshops in an attempt to improve that registration rate and get everybody as legal as possible, as quickly as possible, because we like the legislation that exists. I'm not opposed to your proposed legislation, but I just want to know we, the people, are trying to do something to help improve the registration rate. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that'd like to speak on item number 5? All right, public comment is closed at this time. Mr. Peskin, your name is on the queue. Is that left over from before? Looks like it. Okay. So, Supervisor Wiener, last remarks, and then we'll close
No,
out.
I want to first of all, thank you, Mr. Guy, for the update. This is an ongoing conversation, and it's just really important that we see what is going on, what we can improve, There has been enforcement. We want that to continue. We want to increase the enforcement for people who are violating the law, particularly the really egregious violations of converting entire units or even buildings into hotels, or situations where evictions occur, proceeding short-term rentals. We need to crack down in a very serious way, and I think we are moving in a good direction in terms of enforcement. We also know that we have work to do in terms of registrations, but as the data presented today shows, we are headed in a continual positive direction. And in fact, after Prop F lost at the ballot last November, as the chart in the presentation shows, there was a spike in registration. So when people have confidence that there's a lay of the land, there are rules in place, and there's stability, people will register, and it's going to take work. The law has been in effect just a little over a year, and last year it was a roller coaster kind of year. So let's just let this law work. I'm not saying that there shouldn't ever be any amendments, and I haven't seen Supervisor Peskin's legislation. I look forward to taking a look at it. It may make all the sense in the world. I look forward to reviewing that proposal. But for now, we'll continue to do these hearings to exercise oversight and to have strong public transparency into the enforcement and the administration of this law that is occurring. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to move to continue this item to the call of the chair.
All right, a motion has been made, and without objection, that motion passes unanimously. All right, thank you so much, colleagues. Madam Clerk, are there any other items before this body today?
There's no further business.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.